The stars stretched endlessly outside the windows of the ship Aurora. It moved through space like a silent shadow, carrying hundreds of crew members from many different worlds. Among them was a human engineer named Ethan Cole and his wife, Commander Lyra Vesson, a tall, silver-skinned alien from the Cerati Empire. Their marriage was something that made people talk, whisper, and sometimes laugh quietly. To most of the crew, the pairing made no sense. Humans were seen as soft, emotional, and weak. The Cerati, on the other hand, were known for their discipline and strength. Lyra was respected, feared even, while Ethan was simply known as the quiet human who fixed things. Ethan didn't seem to mind the looks or the quiet laughter that followed him in the corridors. He spent most of his time in the engineering decks, surrounded by the hum of machines and the glow of control panels. He liked the work. Machines didn't judge him. They didn't care that he was smaller than the Cerati soldiers or that his species wasn't known for strength. All they cared about was precision and understanding, and Ethan was very good at both. Lyra, however, found herself torn. She loved her husband deeply, but she could not deny that part of her sometimes saw him through Cerati eyes. She was trained to see strength as something physical, visible. Her people had grown up fighting wars, surviving under the hardest conditions. She often wondered how humans, so fragile-looking, had managed to reach the stars. When they were alone, she was gentle with him, but in public, she was always careful. The Cerati officers respected strength and control. She could not afford to show weakness, even for love. One evening, after her long shift on the command deck, Lyra entered their quarters. Ethan was sitting at a small table working on a device. Sparks glowed as he welded two small components together. He didn't notice her at first. His eyes were focused, his hands steady. For a moment, Lyra simply watched him. There was something peaceful about the way he worked, something calm and patient. "What are you building now?" she asked finally. Ethan looked up with a small smile. "Just a repair tool. The plasma conduits in Section 12 keep overheating. I'm trying to make a stabilizer that works faster than the ship's systems." Lyra crossed her arms. "You spend more time with the engines than with people." He laughed softly. "Engines are easier to understand." Then he looked at her, his expression softening. "Rough day." She nodded slightly and sat across from him. "The crew from the patrol division made a joke about you again," she said quietly. "They think I didn't hear it." Ethan leaned back, unconcerned. "It doesn't bother me." "It should," she said sharply. "You're my husband. You deserve respect." "I'll earn it in my own way," he said simply. "You can't force them to see me differently. They'll learn when the time comes." Lyra frowned. "You sound too sure of that." He smiled faintly. "One day, you'll see we're not as weak as you think." Lyra fell silent. She knew he didn't mean it as an insult, but the words stayed in her mind long after. Humans were full of confidence and emotion, but she had never seen one truly tested the way the Cerati were in battle. Later that night, when Lyra was asleep, Ethan walked quietly to the observation deck. The stars outside shimmered like silver dust. He thought about Earth, about the long history of wars, struggles, and survival that had shaped humanity. People out there still thought humans were fragile, but Ethan knew better. Humanity's strength was not in muscles or armor. It was in something deeper. They could adapt. They could endure. That was why they had survived so much and still looked up at the stars with hope. The next morning, life on the Aurora went on as usual. Lyra led the morning briefing on the bridge, her voice firm and commanding. Ethan worked below, checking power systems. The ship was headed into an unexplored region of space, following faint signals of possible life. Most of the crew were excited, though a few were nervous. Rumors of pirates and unknown dangers always followed ships that went too far from known routes. During lunch, Lyra joined Ethan in the mess hall. They sat together at a quiet table. Around them, conversations buzzed in many languages. A few Cerati soldiers glanced their way, smirking quietly. Lyra ignored them, but she felt a tightness in her chest. "They don't understand," Ethan said softly, not looking up from his food. "And that's okay. Understanding comes with time." Lyra looked at him. wondering again how someone so calm could be so sure of himself. She didn't argue this time. Something about his quiet confidence unsettled her. It was as if he knew something she didn't. As the ship continued its journey through the endless dark, both of them went back to their duties. The Aurora glided through silence, unaware that something waited ahead. And though neither of them knew it yet, the time would soon come when Ethan Cole would have to prove his words true. When Lyra, the proud Sarati commander, would see the strength hidden behind her husband's calm human eyes. The days passed quietly on the Aurora as it traveled deeper into unexplored space. The crew moved through their routines, unaware that something dark was waiting ahead. Ethan Cole spent most of his time in engineering, checking the power systems and calibrating the ship's energy grid. He liked the hum of the engines and the soft vibration under his feet. It felt alive, almost like the ship had a heartbeat of its own. Commander Lyra Vesson was busy on the bridge, leading her officers through patrols and communication checks. She looked calm and confident, her silver skin reflecting the pale light of the stars outside. But deep down, something felt off. The sensors had picked up faint signals 2 days ago, weak distress calls mixed with broken static. The communication officer believed they were old transmissions from abandoned colonies. Lyra wanted to believe that too, but the pattern of the signals bothered her. When her shift ended, she found Ethan waiting for her in their quarters. He was sitting on the edge of the bed, holding a small data pad. The screen showed waves of fluctuating energy readings. "I checked the power systems again," Ethan said quietly. "There's something strange happening. The readings are uneven. It's like something is affecting the Aurora's core from outside." Lyra frowned. "You think it's connected to the signals we picked up?" He nodded. "Maybe. I've seen this kind of interference before. It doesn't feel natural." Lyra crossed her arms. "The navigation team says the signals are too far to worry about. We're safe." Ethan looked up at her. "That's what worries me. They're too calm. We shouldn't ignore it." Lyra sighed, trying not to show her irritation. She admired Ethan's curiosity, but sometimes she thought he worried too much. Humans always expected the worst. She placed a hand on his shoulder. "You've done your job, Ethan. Let the command crew handle the rest." He didn't argue, but his expression told her he wasn't convinced. Later that night, Ethan stayed awake, staring at the ship schematics on his data pad. Something about the readings didn't make sense. There were small spikes of energy near the hull, too rhythmic to be random. He started running simulations quietly, marking possible interference points. He made a note to check the sensors manually in the morning. The next day, the Aurora entered a region filled with dense blue mist. It was a nebula, beautiful and calm, stretching like a sea of light across space. The crew was in awe. Even Lyra found herself staring through the bridge windows, feeling a rare sense of peace. But Ethan, standing behind the control console, looked uneasy. He studied the mist closely. The light patterns were repeating, forming shapes that almost looked alive. "This isn't normal plasma activity," he said softly. The communications officer laughed. "You worry too much, engineer. It's just a nebula." Ethan didn't reply. He leaned closer to the display. There it was again. Tiny fluctuations, like faint echoes bouncing off invisible objects. His stomach tightened. "Commander," he said, looking toward Lyra, "we should raise the shields." Lyra turned to him, confused. "Why? There's no threat." "Because something's moving out there," he said. His voice was calm but certain. The bridge went silent. The sensors officer checked the scanners again, shaking his head. "No sign of any ships, Commander. It's just gas and dust." Lyra hesitated, then nodded. "Keep monitoring. If there's anything unusual, report it immediately." Hours passed. The nebula glowed softly around them. Most of the crew relaxed. Some even joked that humans saw ghosts in the stars. But in engineering, Ethan couldn't let go of the feeling that something was wrong. He ran another scan, isolating faint frequencies hidden under the ship's normal systems. When the results appeared, his heart sank. There were pulses, regular, controlled, and strong, not random at all. He rushed to the bridge, datapad in hand. "Lyra, we need to change course," he said. "Now." She looked at him, surprised by the urgency in his voice. "Ethan, what are you talking about?" He placed the data pad on her console. The readings were clear, energy bursts arranged in a perfect pattern, closing in around them. "These aren't natural," he said. "They're scanning us." Lyra's expression hardened. "Scanning? By who?" Before Ethan could answer, the ship shuddered violently. The lights flickered. A loud alarm echoed through every deck. The communication officer shouted, "Multiple energy signatures detected. They're right on top of us." Lyra jumped to her command seat. "Shields up. Prepare for evasive maneuvers." The stars outside shifted as explosions of light erupted in the mist. Shadowy shapes appeared, ships with jagged hulls and glowing red engines. They came out of the nebula like predators. The bridge filled with shouting voices. Lyra barked orders while the crew scrambled. Ethan felt his chest tighten. The feeling he'd feared was now real. The Aurora was under attack. The first explosion tore through the Aurora's lower decks, throwing crew members off their feet. The ship's alarm screamed as red lights flashed across every corridor. Commander Lyra Vesson grabbed the edge of her command console, steadying herself. "Damage report," she shouted. The response came through broken static. "Engineering hit, power rerouting, casualties unknown." Outside, the attackers revealed themselves. The Varnock, ruthless scavengers who hunted in deep space. Their ships were dark and jagged, shaped like blades. They had come through the nebula, using its energy to hide their approach. Now they surrounded the Aurora like wolves around wounded prey. "Return fire," Lyra ordered. "All batteries, target the nearest vessel." Blue plasma bolts flashed from the Aurora's cannons, but the Varnock were fast. Their ships darted through the mist, firing sharp bursts of red energy that cut through the Aurora's shields. Every impact made the ship tremble. On the bridge, crew members moved quickly, trying to stabilize systems, their faces pale with fear. Down in engineering, Ethan Cole was already moving. Smoke filled the air as sparks rained from broken panels. He grabbed a fire suppressor and sprayed the flames near the power conduits, coughing as he worked. His assistant, a young alien named Jero, shouted over the noise. "The core's unstable. We've lost secondary power." "Then we reroute manually," Ethan said, his calm voice cutting through the panic. "Seal off Section 12 and divert the grid through the lower junction." Jero hesitated. "That could overload the lines." "Not if we balance the flow," Ethan replied. He moved quickly, his hands flying over the controls. The ship's hum steadied slightly. For a moment, it felt like they might have a chance. On the bridge, Lyra's eyes darted between screens. "They're boarding us," someone shouted. Red warning lights blinked on the tactical display. Docking clamps from the enemy ships had attached to the Aurora's hull. The Varnock were forcing their way inside. "Seal all internal bulkheads," Lyra commanded. "Security teams to decks 5 through 7. Protect the civilians and the engineers." Her heart pounded. This was the nightmare every commander feared, an enemy boarding attack. She opened a private channel. "Ethan, where are you?" His voice came through the static, steady and focused. "Engineering, holding power together. You need the shields back online if you want to survive." "Ethan, I want you in a safe compartment," she said firmly. "That's an order." "Can't do that," he answered simply. "I know the systems better than anyone. If I leave now, we lose everything." Lyra hesitated, torn between command and fear. Then she cut the channel, trusting him in a way she didn't fully understand. In the corridors, the sound of heavy boots echoed. The Varnock had broken through. They were tall, armored creatures with glowing red eyes and weapons that crackled with plasma. The Serati soldiers met them head-on, their blue armor shining under the emergency lights. Blades and energy fire clashed as the ship became a battleground. Lyra drew her sidearm and joined the defense. The air smelled of smoke and metal. She fought alongside her crew, every move quick and sharp. Her people were strong, but the Varnock were stronger. The corridors began to fill with the wounded. Ethan, watching from engineering through security feeds, saw the chaos spreading. He had no weapons, no armor. But he had the ship. He pulled up the environmental controls and rerouted the airlocks. If he could trap the invaders in small sections, he could buy time. "Jero, seal bulkhead 7, he ordered. "Now!" "But our people are still there." "Just do it. They've fallen back." The doors slammed shut, cutting off a squad of Varnock as the section vented into space. The pressure drop roared through the comms, then silence. Ethan closed his eyes for a moment. He didn't like doing it, but it was the only way to keep the rest alive. Up on the bridge, the ship shook again. A console sparked near Lyra, sending one of her officers to the ground. "They've taken the mid-deck armory," someone shouted. Lyra's jaw tightened. "Then we take it back." She pulled a rifle from the wall and led a small group down the corridor. She didn't have time to think about Ethan. She just needed to keep moving. As the fighting spread, the Aurora began to lose altitude control. Panels flickered, the lights dimming. Ethan kept rerouting power, sweating from the heat of the damaged systems. His shirt was stained with smoke and oil. Jero looked at him with disbelief. "You're not a soldier," the young alien said. "How are you so calm?" Ethan didn't look up. "Because panic doesn't fix anything." Then, through the static of the intercom, Lyra's voice came again. Loud, fierce, and strained. "Engineering status." "Still holding," Ethan replied. "But we've got multiple hull breaches and no shield generator. If we don't stabilize the reactor soon, we'll lose everything." "We're outnumbered," she said, her voice low. "They're cutting through us." Ethan hesitated, then spoke quietly. "Then we make the ship fight back." He opened a new control channel and began rerouting power into the emergency defense grid, something no one had used in years. Lights flickered across the ship as hidden turrets extended from the walls and ceilings. The next time the Varnock tried to advance, the corridors exploded with energy fire. Lyra's group looked up in shock as the turrets opened fire beside them. For a moment, the enemy froze. Lyra realized what had happened and whispered, "Ethan." Down below, Ethan adjusted the targeting manually. "Come on, Aurora," he muttered. "Let's show them what you can do." For the first time, the Varnock advance slowed. The ship that had seemed so fragile suddenly fought back with deadly precision. And somewhere deep inside its heart, a human who was supposed to be weak was turning the tide of battle. The corridors of the Aurora burned with light and smoke. The Varnock forces kept coming, pushing through walls and sealed doors, but they no longer moved unopposed. Every time they advanced, new defense systems came to life. Turrets, traps, and sudden power surges turned the ship into a maze of death. And behind it all was one man, Ethan Cole, the human engineer everyone thought was weak. In the command center, Commander Lyra Vesson moved quickly, shouting orders to keep the crew alive. Her uniform was torn, her face streaked with grime. The situation was desperate. Still, the ship was fighting harder than anyone expected. As Lyra looked at the tactical display, she saw strange patterns in the ship's power flow, controlled, deliberate movements. It was as if someone was guiding the Aurora like a living creature. "Who's rerouting our power systems?" she demanded. "Engineering," the operations officer replied. "It's Cole. He's overriding the command grid." Lyra froze for a second. "Ethan?" "Yes, Commander. He's doing things we didn't know the systems could do." Lyra's heart pounded. She opened a private channel. "Ethan, what are you doing down there?" His voice came back through the static, calm and steady. "Keeping us alive. I've locked down half the ship and rerouted auxiliary systems into the defense grid. You'll have more power for weapons in about 10 seconds. "Ethan, that's impossible without the main relay." "I built a backup weeks ago," he said simply. "Didn't think I'd need it this soon." Lyra stared at the comm, speechless. This was the same man everyone called fragile, the same human she thought couldn't handle pressure. Yet here he was, saving the ship. Another explosion rocked the deck. Sparks rained from the ceiling. Lyra grabbed onto the console and shouted, "Bridge to all hands, hold your positions. We're not giving up this ship." Down in engineering, Ethan was moving fast. His hands were burned and shaking, but he didn't stop. He patched together cables, rerouted junctions, and used tools that were never meant for combat. Jero, his assistant, followed him wide-eyed. "The Varnock have broken through Deck 6, Jero shouted. "Seal it off," Ethan said without hesitation. "There are still people there." Ethan glanced at the screen. "They're retreating. I can trap the enemy between sealed bulkheads. Just trust me." Jero hesitated but obeyed. A few seconds later, the sensors showed the invading force trapped between pressure doors. Ethan triggered the airlock system. The vacuum tore through the corridor, pulling the Varnock into space. Silence followed. Ethan leaned back, breathing hard. "Sorry," he whispered, "but I'm not letting you take my crew." When Lyra heard about the successful lockdown, she couldn't believe it. The Aurora's survival now depended on her husband, the human everyone had dismissed as weak. She ordered her team to fall back toward the central decks. The more the enemy advanced, the more traps they triggered. Systems that had been quiet for years suddenly came alive under Ethan's control. The tide of the battle began to change. On Deck 7, a group of Serati soldiers was pinned down by enemy fire. Suddenly, the floor beneath the Varnock attackers opened. A burst of white gas exploded from the vents, followed by the sudden closure of the blast doors. The soldiers looked up in confusion. "Who did that?" one of them asked. "The human engineer," their sergeant said, shaking his head. "Guess he's not so weak after all." Meanwhile, Lyra was leading a small squad toward the reactor level to secure it. She could hear gunfire and metal scraping through the walls. The air was hot and heavy with smoke. When they reached the lower decks, she saw Ethan through the haze, working furiously at a control panel. He looked up and gave her a tired smile. "You made it." Lyra ran to him. "You're supposed to be in a safe zone." "I am," he said. "Relatively speaking." He motioned toward the flickering control board. "If I can stabilize the core, we'll have enough power to push them back." Lyra stared at him, realizing how wrong she had been about him. "You're risking your life." "So are you," he said simply. Before she could answer, the ship shook violently. The reactor room lights dimmed, and the sound of metal grinding filled the air. Jero shouted, "They've breached the outer hull." Ethan grabbed a plasma cutter. "Get everyone behind the shields. I'll hold this section." Lyra stepped forward. "No, we do this together." The next few minutes were chaos. Varnock soldiers forced their way in, roaring as they fired plasma weapons. Lyra and her team returned fire while Ethan sealed emergency barriers. When one of the aliens broke through, Ethan swung the plasma cutter, striking it across the chest. The creature fell back, its armor glowing from the heat. Lyra turned in shock. "You fight too." Ethan gave her a quick grin. Engineers got to defend his work. The battle raged on, but the tide was turning. The Aurora, guided by Ethan's hands, was fighting back with intelligence and precision no one expected. Systems designed for maintenance had become weapons. The invaders were losing ground. As the smoke cleared, Lyra looked at her husband, standing in front of the glowing reactor, his face lit by its blue light. He was exhausted but unshaken. In that moment, she finally understood. Strength wasn't just about power or fearlessness. It was about heart, focus, and refusing to give up even when the odds were impossible. For the first time, she saw Ethan not as a fragile human, but as something far stronger than anyone she had ever known. The ship groaned like a wounded animal, its metal frame echoing through the dark corridors. Fires burned in several sections, and the air was heavy with smoke and the smell of melted steel. The Varnock attack had slowed, but the battle was far from over. The Aurora drifted in space, half its systems offline, surrounded by debris from the enemy ships it had already destroyed. On the command deck, Lyra Vesson looked around at her exhausted crew. Everyone was hurt or covered in grime, but no one was giving up. Every face showed the same determination to survive. "Report," she ordered quietly. "The enemy's regrouping," said the tactical officer. "They've lost 2 ships, but at least 3 are still out there." They're circling. Lyra clenched her jaw. They're hunting us. Down in engineering, Ethan Cole was bent over the control board. The glow of the reactor bathed his face in blue light. His fingers moved fast across the controls, rerouting damaged systems, calculating power flows, and setting traps for the next attack. Jarrow stood nearby, watching in awe. "You're running the whole ship by yourself," the young alien said. Ethan didn't look up. "Not by myself. Everyone's doing their part. I'm just trying to keep it all together." Suddenly, the ship rocked again. A direct hit slammed into the hull. The lights flickered. Ethan steadied himself and checked the readings. "They're hitting us from range," he muttered. "They're testing our defenses." He tapped his comm. "Lyra, they're trying to push us out of cover. If we move, they'll target our engines." "Then we don't move," Lyra replied. "Can you give us any more power to the front shields?" "Not without cooking the core," Ethan said. "But I might have another idea." He opened a storage panel and pulled out a small metallic case. Inside was a compact exosuit, something he had been secretly building for months. It was meant for heavy repairs in radiation zones, not combat, but it was strong and fast. Jarrow stared. "You built that?" "Yeah," Ethan said. "Didn't think I'd ever need to use it." He began strapping into the suit, the servos humming to life. "Jarrow, I need you to keep the reactor stable while I'm gone." "Gone?" Jarrow blinked. "Where are you going?" Ethan grabbed a rifle from the emergency rack. "To give our friends upstairs some help." When he stepped onto the lift, his heart was pounding, but his mind was calm. The ship shook again as another blast hit. The lights flickered red. Over the comms, he could hear Lyra shouting orders. The sound of battle grew louder as the lift opened onto the upper decks. The corridors were chaos. Smoke, sparks, and bodies filled the narrow halls. The Varnock were pushing forward again, their armor glowing red in the dim light. Lyra's soldiers were holding them back, but just barely. When Ethan stepped into view, several crew members stared in disbelief. The quiet engineer they knew was now covered in armor, moving with purpose. "Where do you need me?" he asked. Lyra turned, stunned. "Ethan? What are you?" "No time," he said, raising his weapon. "Just point me where it's worst." Without waiting, he moved forward, firing short, precise bursts. The exosuit amplified his strength and steadied his aim. When a Varnock charged him, he dodged and used the suit's arm to slam the creature into the wall. The soldiers around him cheered, their morale rising. Lyra joined him, firing beside him. "You're insane," she shouted over the noise. He smiled slightly. "You married me." Together, they fought through the corridors, clearing one section after another. Every time they made progress, Ethan rerouted systems to seal the areas behind them. It was dangerous, exhausting work, but it was working. The Varnock advance began to falter. On the bridge, the tactical officer watched the readings with disbelief. "Commander, the enemy is retreating inside the ship's interior zones. They're falling back." Lyra took a breath, her eyes burning with determination. "Don't let them regroup. Push them out." She and Ethan led the counterattack down the final corridor. The floor shook beneath them as explosions echoed from the hull. The last group of Varnock tried to make a stand near the main airlock. Ethan sprinted forward, grabbed a fallen plasma grenade, and tossed it toward them. The explosion sent debris flying, tearing through their armor. The survivors stumbled back, only to be met by Lyra's squad. For a moment, everything went quiet. The ship's alarms still wailed, but the gunfire had stopped. The corridors were filled with smoke and silence. Then the comm crackled with the voice of the tactical officer. "Commander, the enemy ships are breaking off." Lyra lowered her weapon slowly. She turned toward Ethan, who was breathing heavily, the armor scorched and cracked. "You did it," she said softly. He shook his head. "We did it." As if in response, another tremor rolled through the deck. A console sparked nearby. Ethan checked his wrist monitor, his face tightening. "They've hit the main engine. We're losing containment." Lyra's heart sank. "What can we do?" Ethan looked at her, his expression steady. We end this. I can use the warp core's residual energy to overload the nearest enemy ship. But it's risky. How risky? He met her eyes. It could tear the Aurora apart. Lyra stepped closer. There has to be another way. He smiled sadly. There isn't. You said humans were weak, remember? Let's prove you wrong one more time. Before she could argue, he turned and started toward engineering. The sound of the engines filled the corridors as he moved. Behind him, Lyra shouted his name, but he didn't stop. He had made up his mind. On the bridge, the crew watched as the enemy ships moved closer again, preparing for a final strike. Then, suddenly, the Aurora's engines flared brighter than ever before. The sensors went wild. Lyra gripped the edge of her console, whispering to herself, "Ethan, what are you doing?" In the heart of the ship, standing before the roaring reactor, Ethan entered the override codes. His voice was quiet, calm. "You married me because you thought I was kind. Now you'll see what kindness fights for." The warp pulse built to critical levels. Outside, the stars blurred, and the Varnock fleet was consumed in a wave of white light. When the light faded, silence filled the void. The wreckage of the Varnock ships drifted among the stars, their remains glowing faintly as energy bled into space. The Aurora floated in the center of it all, battered and smoking, but still in one piece. Lyra Vesson stood on the bridge, gripping the rail. Every muscle in her body trembled, her mind racing to understand what had just happened. The ship sensors were scrambled, but the image on the main screen was clear. The enemy fleet was gone. "Report," she said, her voice barely steady. The tactical officer scanned the readings. "The Varnock are gone, Commander. All of them. Their ships were destroyed in the energy surge." He hesitated. "But so was our main core." Lyra's heart sank. "Engineering?" she asked quickly. No response. She tapped her comm again. "Ethan, respond." Static. Only static. Without hesitation, she ran from the bridge. The corridors were half-lit and filled with smoke, the air thick with the smell of burnt circuitry. Crew members stepped aside as she passed, their eyes following her silently. They knew where she was going. When she reached engineering, the doors were jammed. She forced them open, and the sight inside took her breath away. The reactor room was a ruin. Sparks flew from broken conduits, and the containment field flickered weakly. In the center of it all stood Ethan's exosuit, motionless, scorched black from the heat. "Ethan," she whispered, stepping closer. Her voice cracked. "Ethan, answer me." The suit didn't move. For a long moment, she just stood there, staring, the noise of the failing reactor fading into the background. Then, suddenly, a faint sound came from the comm line. "Lyra!" Her eyes widened. She ran forward, kneeling beside the armor. The faceplate was cracked, but behind it she could see him, his face pale, eyes barely open. "You did it," she said, her voice breaking. "You saved us." He smiled weakly. "Guess, I wasn't that weak after all." She reached for his hand, holding it tightly. "Don't talk. We'll get you out." He shook his head slightly. "No time. Containment's gone. You need to evacuate the ship." "I'm not leaving you," she said firmly. He looked at her, the corners of his mouth turning up faintly. "You have to. The ship needs a commander. I already did my part." His breathing grew slower. "Lyra, promise me you'll make it back home." Tears burned her eyes. "Ethan, please." But before she could finish, the alarms flared again. The containment field failed with a flash of light, and the heat surged through the room. She had no choice. Her crew's voices echoed through her comm, begging her to leave. "I'll come back for you," she whispered, pulling away as the emergency shutters began to close. His face was the last thing she saw before the doors sealed shut. Minutes later, the escape pods launched from the Aurora, drifting away as the ship's hull glowed red. From the pod window, Lyra watched as the Aurora's remains floated among the stars. There was no explosion, just a quiet fading light, like a candle going out. The silence after was unbearable. Hours later, the rescue ship Horizon picked up the survivors. Lyra sat in the medbay, staring at nothing. Her uniform was torn, her hands trembling. A medic approached carefully. "Commander Vesson, we've confirmed you're the only senior officer who made it. You saved a lot of lives." She didn't answer. She just looked out the window at the endless stretch of stars. Somewhere out there, the wreck of the Aurora drifted, and with it, the man who had changed her life. Over the next few days, the survivors told stories. How a human had saved them, how one act of courage had turned the tide. Word spread through the fleet. The legend of the Aurora and her human engineer began to grow. Some said he had become part of the ship itself, that his energy was what held it together until the end. Lyra never corrected them. Weeks later, she stood before the Galactic Council, reporting the events. Her voice was calm, professional, but her eyes told a different story. When the council members asked about the human, she paused for a long time before answering. "He was brave," she said finally. "He did what none of us could. He showed us what humanity truly is." Afterward, when she left the chamber, she stopped by the observation deck. The stars stretched endlessly before her, cold and beautiful. She whispered softly to the void, as if he could still hear her. "You weren't weak, Ethan. You were the strongest person I've ever known." For a long time, she stood there in silence, the hum of the ship surrounding her. Then she turned and walked away, ready to face whatever came next. Somewhere deep in the stars, the memory of the Aurora lived on, of a human who had proved that even in the darkest moments, strength could come from the heart. Years had passed since the Battle of the Aurora, but the story had never faded. Across the colonies, people spoke of the ship that had faced an entire Varnock fleet and survived, of the human who had given his life to save everyone aboard. Some said it was just a tale, a myth born from chaos and war. Others swore it was true. For Commander Lyra Vesson, it wasn't a legend. It was memory, the kind that never left you. She now served aboard the Horizon, a new ship assigned to Deep Space Patrol. The crew respected her deeply, not just as a commander but as someone who had seen the worst and endured it. She had earned the nickname the Widow of the Stars. Though she hated it, it reminded her of what she had lost, and who she had loved. Every night, when her duties were done, Lyra sat by the viewport, staring into the blackness. She wondered if somewhere out there, pieces of the Aurora still drifted. Sometimes, she thought she could almost hear Ethan's voice, calm and sure, guiding her through the silence. One evening, as the Horizon moved through the edge of the Kepler rift, the communications officer called out, "Commander, we're picking up something strange." Lyra turned. "Strange how?" "It's a signal, ma'am. Weak but structured. It's repeating on an old human frequency." Her heart skipped. "Human? Out here?" The officer nodded. "Yes, ma'am, but it's old. The format hasn't been used for decades." Lyra moved closer to the console. "Play it." The bridge filled with static, then a faint pulse of sound, slow, steady, almost like a heartbeat. Then came a voice, broken, distorted, but unmistakable. "Aurora, holding position, system stable. Don't forget." Lyra froze. Her blood ran cold. "Repeat that," she whispered. The officer played it again. The same message, the same haunting tone. Her hands tightened into fists. "Where's it coming from?" "Sector 19 Gamma, near the edge of the rift. But Commander, that region's uncharted. It's dangerous." Lyra stared at the map, the coordinates glowing faintly. "Set a course," she ordered. The officer hesitated. "Commander, with respect, if this is a trap, then we'll deal with it," she said firmly. "Set the course." Hours later, the Horizon emerged into the region. The stars were dimmer here, the void darker than usual. Clouds of gas twisted in the distance, reflecting light in eerie colors. The sensors struggled to keep up. Then, through the darkness, something appeared. A ship, drifting, silent, and broken, but unmistakable. "The Aurora," Lyra whispered. Her heart pounded. Couldn't be. The hull was scorched, torn in places, but the markings were clear. She recognized every line, every curve. It was her ship. "Commander," said the officer softly, "there's no power readings. It's been dead for years." "Bring us closer," Lyra said. When they reached visual range, the bridge went silent. The Aurora floated like a ghost, its hull catching the faint light of a distant star. It should have been impossible. The ship had been destroyed, or at least that's what everyone had believed. "Any life signs?" she asked. The sensors officer checked. "None." Lyra stood, her mind racing. "Prepare a shuttle. I'm going aboard." "Commander, that's not safe," the first officer protested. "The structure could collapse." Lyra met his eyes. "I have to see it. That's an order." Moments later, she stepped into the shuttle with a small team. As they approached the derelict, the silence of space seemed to grow heavier. When they docked and entered through one of the damaged airlocks, the interior was exactly as she remembered it. Only now it was frozen in time. Dust floated in the air. Every corridor was dark, lit only by their flashlights. "Stay close," Lyra said quietly. Her voice echoed through the halls. They reached engineering. The doors were half open, twisted from the explosion years ago. She stepped through carefully, her light cutting through the shadows. The room was ruined except for one thing, the exosuit. It stood in the center of the chamber, upright, its metal surface blackened but intact. The air was still heavy with memory. Lyra's breath caught. She moved closer, her hand trembling as she touched the cold armor. For a moment, she closed her eyes, remembering his voice, his smile, his courage. Then her flashlight flickered. A low hum filled the room. "Commander," one of the soldiers said nervously, "did you hear that?" Lyra looked at the exosuit. The hum was coming from it. Her heart raced. "Check for energy readings." The soldier scanned. "Ma'am, there's a power source. Very faint, but it's active." She stepped back, stunned. The suit's chest plate glowed faintly blue, just for a second. Then it faded again. "Ethan?" she whispered. No response. Only the soft hum of the ship's decaying systems. But in that silence, Lyra felt something. A presence, warm and steady. Not physical, but real. She smiled through her tears. "You kept your promise," she said softly. When they returned to the horizon, Lyra carried a small memory core they had found near the reactor. The data inside was badly damaged, but a single file remained intact. A short message recorded in Ethan's voice. "If you're hearing this," it said, "then I guess I didn't make it back. But that's okay. Just remember, strength isn't about what you can destroy. It's about what you protect. Take care of them, Lyra. Take care of the stars." The crew listened in silence. No one spoke for a long time. That night, Lyra stood by the viewport again. The wreck of the Aurora drifted behind them, framed by the light of distant suns. She whispered quietly, "I will, Ethan. I promise." And somewhere, in the deep, endless dark, the stars seemed to shine a little brighter. Months passed after the rediscovery of the Aurora. The wreck was towed back to a secure dock in the Andrus system, where the galactic fleet began studying it carefully. Engineers and scientists walked through its quiet halls, documenting every scar, every piece of burned metal, every whisper of the battle that had made it a legend. For Commander Lyra Vesson, it wasn't a relic. It was home. She spent hours walking through the ship's remains, touching the walls, listening to the echoes of the past. Even though the Aurora was silent, she felt something there. A presence that seemed to linger in every corridor. The crew of the Horizon had gone their separate ways, but Lyra stayed behind. She had been offered promotion, even command of a new fleet cruiser, but she turned it down. She wanted to make sure the Aurora was properly honored. Not as a ship that had been destroyed, but as one that had saved countless lives. One day, as she stood in the ruined engineering bay, a soft light flickered from one of the damaged consoles. She frowned and stepped closer. The system shouldn't have had any power, but the display glowed faintly. Text appeared on the cracked screen. "System reboot. Initiated." Her heart skipped. She called for the techs, who rushed in to check the readings. "Ma'am, this can't be right," one of them said. These systems were dead for years, but the glow continued, spreading through the chamber. The lights hummed faintly, and the Aurora's reactor, long thought lifeless, gave off a soft, pulsing rhythm. Not enough to power the ship, but enough to suggest something still worked deep inside. Lyra stared at the display. Could it be an automated backup? Possibly, the tech said. Or something else. The hum was steady now, like a heartbeat. That night, when the dockyard lights dimmed and the workers left, Lyra stayed behind. She stood in front of the reactor core, its faint blue light reflecting in her eyes. "Ethan," she whispered, "if there's anything left of you in there, thank you for everything." The hum grew slightly louder, just for a moment. She smiled sadly. "I'll take that as a yes." Over the next few weeks, the engineers discovered something incredible. Deep inside the Aurora's systems, fragments of a consciousness remained. It wasn't alive, not in a biological sense, but Ethan's neural patterns, stored in the ship's data systems, had somehow survived the overload. His mind had become part of the Aurora. The discovery spread through the fleet like wildfire. Scientists debated how it was possible, but to Lyra, the explanation didn't matter. All she knew was that a part of him had never left. She requested that the Aurora not be dismantled. Instead, she proposed something new, a memorial station built around the ship, powered by its remaining systems. A beacon of light for all travelers to see when they crossed the void. The Galactic Council agreed. Years later, that beacon became one of the most visited places in known space. Pilgrims came from every world to see the ship that had changed the course of history. They called it the Eternal Aurora. At its heart, the reactor still pulsed softly, like the beating heart of a sleeping giant. Lyra spent her final years there, tending the memorial and speaking with those who came to pay their respects. She told them about courage, love, and sacrifice, and about a human who had once seemed weak, but who had become stronger than anyone could have imagined. On the last night of her life, she walked the quiet halls alone. The lights dimmed around her, and the hum of the reactor filled the air. She reached the engineering deck and placed her hand on the console, just as she had done so many times before. "Ethan," she whispered softly, "I'm tired. I think it's time to rest." The hum deepened, almost like an answer. She smiled faintly, leaning against the console. "Wait for me, all right?" Moments later, the lights flickered gently. For the first time in decades, the Aurora's systems glowed brighter. The hum of the reactor became a soft, soothing melody that filled the entire station. The workers who found her later said it was as if the ship had come alive one last time, to guide her home. When the lights dimmed again, they found Lyra sitting peacefully, eyes closed, a small smile on her face. From that day on, the Eternal Aurora shone with a steady light that never faded. Travelers from every corner of the galaxy could see its glow long before they reached the system. They said it was the soul of a human and his alien wife, guarding the stars together forever. And so their story lived on. The tale of a man who was thought weak, a love that crossed worlds, and a light that would never fade.